One thing these police chiefs and sheriffs agree on is that the future of the 3 regional police training academies looks bleak. The Alabama Law Enforcement Planning Agency has temporarily bailed the academies out, giving them $20,000 each to keep them running until October. But after that, there's no money forthcoming. The governor says consolidating the academies would save money, but Sheriff's Association President Tom Purvis disagrees.
We're opposed to training being under one roof because Department of Public Safety is a different type of law enforcement agency than is a municipal police department or a county sheriff's department. And a law enforcement officer from North Alabama has problems that are different and unique from a law enforcement officer in South Alabama.
Purvis says police officers should be trained in a local setting. He says if the academies are consolidated, the quality of police work in the local cities and municipalities would not be as high. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Governor James appeared unhurried about filling the vacant PSC seat. He says he'll decide in a day or two after Commissioner Matthews leaves and will probably interview applicants next week. Matthews' last day is next Tuesday, March 31st. The governor announced he had lunch with State Democratic Party Chairman Jimmy Knight and had discussed the party's future.
It's where it should take the form or shape strongly as far as ideology is concerned. Jimmy, you correct me if I get off base a little bit here. Where it should serve as a framework for which candidates could run, its openness, understanding of the rules and regulations with respect to various techniques.
Besides giving an update on legislative events here in Alabama, the governor talked about the situation in Washington during his visit. Governor James says he told President Reagan his proposals were well received by Alabamians. James says he's in agreement to many of the president's proposals, except the 10% across-the-board tax cut before the budget is balanced. Jane Matheson, WSFA TV News.
Goodwill's executive director, John Walters, says the first 3 months of the year are typically slow because most people haven't done their spring cleaning yet. But he says donations in February were worse than expected, 20% lower than last year. He says the sales in the Goodwill stores were also down. He says people aren't buying because of tight money and Goodwill's limited variety of items for sale.
What we've done now is to go to a 4-day work week so that we don't have to have any more terminations, total terminations, firings, if you will. We've taken this as the lesser of 2 evils, the lesser of many evils.
Walter says the other handicapped services won't be affected, as well as the Goodwill stores, which will continue to stay open 6 days a week. He predicts the 4-day week in vocational training will only be necessary 3 to 5 months, but it may not take that long if sales as well as donations pick up soon. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
According to a state budget office study of the 3 budgets, Representative Walter Owens wants to spend the least on education, almost $1.3 billion. Governor James is next with $1.321 billion, and Representative Langford is the highest at $1.323 billion. But within those amounts, Owens' bill proposes the highest figure to be spent on the minimum education program, $440 million as compared to $438 million suggested in the governor's budget and $402 million in Langford's bill. But while Langford spends the least on basic education, it proposes the highest expenditure for teacher retirement, just more than $216 million, including a new $35 million teacher hospital medical insurance program. Retirement contributions under the governor's budget would total $180 million, while Owens' budget would only spend $136 million. Owens' figure is lower because of 2 other bills he's sponsoring, one of which would require local school boards to pick up the retirement cost for some of their teachers. The other basic differences in the 3 budgets is higher education. The governor's plan proposes $248 million for the 4-year universities, and most of it in block grants to be spent by the universities at their discretion. Owens' budget funds them just $6.5 million more than the governor suggests, but it spells out how each dollar should be spent. Langford's is the most generous to universities, proposing $266 million. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Bartley told the Senate committee of possible ethics violations by Social Security Director Ben Swindle. He says Swindle used state time and materials to send letters to member agencies, asking them to urge legislators to vote against the bill that would terminate his agency. Whatley says the letters contain false information and that they represent the use of state money for Swindle's own financial gain. Senator Bobby Denton from Tuscumbia expressed his resentment at what he called Swindle's unprofessional behavior. The committee voted to continue the Social Security Agency despite a House-passed bill that would terminate it. The senators didn't respond to a letter from the finance director saying the state would save $111,000 if the state employees' retirement system took over the Social Security Agency's duties. Senator Bob Gullidge suggested that the agency establish better lines of communication with the budget officer so that Social Security budget projections won't be as inaccurate as they have been the past 2 years. The bill to continue the agency must now go to the full Senate. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
The Auburn girls are region favorites this year. They certainly looked impressive in defeating the Jeff Davis Lady Vols this afternoon. This is Auburn's #2 doubles team of Leanne McLaughlin and Joy Johnston against Susan Carastro and Shandy Bozeman of Jeff Davis. A familiar name on the Auburn roster is that of Missy Dye. She is the daughter of new head football coach Pat Dye. Missy plays on Auburn's #3 doubles team. In the boys' matches today, a chance to see one of Montgomery's best junior players, Dow Holly of Jeff Davis. Holly defeated Philip Watts of Mountain Brook in the #1 singles, 7-5, 6-4. Holly holds city titles in the 16 and 18-year-old age groups. He had a time of it today, though, with Watts. Holly jumped out 5-1 in the second set, but held on to win it 6-4. Elsewhere in the doubles competition, the Vols' #2 team of Steve Selikoff and Pierce Lefebvre won their match 7-5, 6-2. But in the #3 doubles, Jeff Rice and Bill Stanzik fell in 3 sets. Mountain Brook went on to win the match by the score of 6-3. Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports.
This is a common sight in many post office branches in the area. Customers asking to buy 3-cent stamps, but being told there were none to sell.
We've sold in the last week about 600,000, and our supply is almost diminished. We are getting some from Birmingham, and we've got a special order in from Washington, D.C., which we expect by Monday. And we've had a real crunch on 3-cent stamps.
Williams says this latest increase of 3 cents for a stamp will probably be enough for a while, but he says if the U.S. Post Office had received the 5-cent increase, making stamps cost 20 cents, another rate increase would be even less likely. The B stamp won't be around long. It's only being used temporarily until the Post Office can print up the new 18-cent stamps. But if you go ahead and mail a letter using the 15-cent stamp, the Post Office will send it on through, but they'll print a Mountain Dew on the envelope. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Camp says he has difficulty understanding Alabama Power's opposition to the municipal generation bill when its parent company, Southern Company, advocates joint generation. Camp says he would endorse the bill as it is now, but he would like to see several changes. Camp says the 3 parties that would be involved in joint generation, the power company, municipalities, and rural area co-ops, need protective territorial boundaries.
These 3 groups ought to be able to get together and decide on some territorial limitations that can let this bill get on, move, and be passed that will help all of us as ratepayers and help us hold down the cost of electricity in the future. And I think the bill is important enough that if the Public Service Commission could function as a mediating body, we should do it.
Alabama Power has also objected to the bill's lack of territorial limits. Power Company spokesman Chris Conway says that's the main difference between Alabama's bill and the ones passed by 28 other states. However, the PSC president says municipal generation, even as the bill currently reads, is the only thing that will materially help cut the cost of electricity. Jane Matheson, WSFA TV News.
Tallahassee Jack Venable thinks the loophole in the Bond Act gives new retailers an unfair advantage over existing businesses. But Montgomery's Larry Dixon says even though the tax-exempt status should be changed for the retailers, they should still be able to use the bonds purely for a financing advantage. Venable won overwhelming approval of the 3 bills cutting retailers out, but allowing hospital boards, historical commissions, and downtown renovation projects to use the bonds. But even if the three bills pass, there are 20 counties in the state who already have constitutional provisions exempting them from the restrictions Venable wants. A fourth bill of Venable's would repeal the amendments for those counties, but that issue has to be taken to the people for a vote in November of 1982. Dixon is concerned that if the voters don't repeal the exceptions for those 20 counties, then retailers in those counties could still use the tax-free bonds, while the rest of the 47 counties wouldn't be allowed to. The package of 4 bills now goes to the Senate, where Venable feels passage will be tough. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News in the House of Representatives.
The Heritage Green is a multi-purpose complex composed of a little theater, the county museum, and library. The tour began in the museum, a structure Montgomery supporters hope will be the model for the first phase of construction here. Once inside, the Montgomery delegation met the mayor of Greenville and others instrumental in making the Heritage Green a reality. During a panel discussion with Greenville residents, members of the Montgomery delegation were given the opportunity to ask questions about the complex. The most important was how it was funded. The three-building complex cost a total of $6,300,000 when it was built in the early 70s. The same type of project would cost Montgomeryans $10 million. Much of the funding for the South Carolina complex came from donations from the private sector, businesses, the city and county, with a small amount from the federal government. Greenville officials say it's important to tap the local financial resources. They also stress the need for a community foundation to help raise funds for the project. Besides funding, Montgomery officials are concerned if such a facility will attract major businesses. Greenville officials say at least 4 major businesses have located here since the Heritage Green first opened. Whether they came exclusively for cultural activities isn't known, but officials say it's been a definite plus in their favor. Reporting from Greenville, South Carolina, Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Tempers flared when a measure came before the Senate that would have rescinded the legislature's meeting schedule already set for the rest of the month. That schedule calls for both houses to meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays only. Most of the senators wanted to change the schedule, so the 3 filibustering senators would have to debate non-stop from calendar day to calendar day. Senator J. Richmond Pearson, one of those filibustering the death penalty, then began a second filibuster on the motion to change the meeting days. That prompted several senators to sign a cloture petition. To invoke cloture, at least half the senators sign a petition to stop debate on an issue and require a vote. Then 2/3 of the Senate must approve the petition. The cloture petition that came up for a vote would have stopped the filibuster on changing the meeting days. It was 3 votes short of being ratified. But Pearson was upset that cloture had even been brought up. He said he saw no point in continuing debate if the senators were going to change the rules, and he accused Lieutenant Governor George McMillan of flaunting the rules. As soon as Pearson and his colleagues sat down, McMillan quickly ramrodded the death penalty through the Senate. The final vote was 31-3 with 1 senator absent. Then senators voted to keep the original meeting schedule, a move that prompted expressions of disgust from Pearson. After the governor signs the bill, as he has indicated he will, Alabama will have a new death penalty effective July 1st. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
County Commission Chairman Mac McWhorter asked the school board members to take the land transfer proposal under consideration. The commission members have been under pressure to come up with a plan for a new jail. The tract of land is only a few blocks up the street from the courthouse and is the only land nearby that would meet the requirements of the county. Board member Chairman Henry Adair made the motion to deed the land, which was quickly adopted after a short discussion. In other action, the board heard from a special committee assigned to study the effects of funding cutbacks in the school lunch program as a result of reduced budget cut proposals made by the Reagan administration. According to the committee report, the county school system would lose a total of $1,158,718 if the proposed federal cuts are made. School officials say that figure accounts for approximately 20% of the public schools' nutrition budget for 1979-80. In order to make up the federal fund loss, the report indicates that the average price of a school lunch would increase by as much as 63 cents, which would mean the students who pay the full price for their lunches would bear the burden of making up the difference for those students who receive free or reduced price lunches. The report indicates that the greater the number of free lunches, the higher the cost to the students who pay. The committee study does not make an allowance for price increases as a result of inflation, which directly results in higher food, labor, and equipment costs. The board members say they'll take the information under advisement and make necessary changes in order to keep all of the lunchrooms throughout the school system open. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
The Hawks ripped thoroughbred pitching for 14 hits and an equal number of runs. Huntington scored 1 in the first inning, 2 in the second, 4 in the fourth and fifth innings, and 3 in the sixth. Kentucky State starter Ronald Thompson left after 4, having surrendered 7 runs. His replacement, Steve Canellos, gave up just as many over the final 3. Malcolm Oates pitched all but the last half an inning for Huntington to pick up the win. Keith Tomlinson came on relief as coach Roger Lambert cleared the bench. In the Hawks' Wild and Willie fifth, Tim McWhorter stroked a double that rolled to the fence in left center. The Andalusian native held up at second, but McWhorter would soon bring home Huntington's 9th run as Donnie Kaysen sent a Canellos pitch over the right field fence for a home run. 1 hop, and the ball was across Fairview Avenue. When Kaysen crossed the plate, Huntington led 10-1. For encores, Oates sent the next Canellos pitch over the center field fence. The Hawks went on to win the first of 2, 14-1. It was Huntington's 15th win of the season. Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports.
The 1-acre dump is located behind the abandoned Thompson-Hayward chemical plant, about 2 miles from Maxwell Air Force Base on the old Birmingham Highway. Dan Cooper, Deputy Director of the State Solid Waste Division, says most of the chemicals, thought to be an agricultural type, were buried in pits and trenches 6 to 12 feet deep. Officials said yesterday about 60 truckloads of soil have been removed from the area so far, with 30 to 40 more loads still to be hauled away. Alfred Shipley, Director of the Solid Waste Division, says the dump poses no threat to the public. Officials say some of the chemicals were buried within 2 or 3 feet of the water table, but they don't think there has been any contamination of groundwater so far. The nearest stream is Katoma Creek, about a half-mile away. A health department spokesman says the Thompson-Hayward Company has been using the area as a dumping site since the 1950s. According to Dan Cooper of the Solid Waste Division, the company itself notified his office of the waste site and is paying for the cleanup operation. As a result, the state has not filed charges against the company. Officials of Thompson-Hayward Chemical have declined comment concerning the waste site. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
That's all we need. Did you sign too? No, I haven't signed yet. Here's an empty space right here. Here's another one. Right across the V5. We've got to do something against the wind. I think they're just down, turns it off. And it's still $180 a month in a little old apartment, if you know Ski Lodge.
Yeah, $180 a month.
Just for electric.
Thought mine was bad.
Some of these people have been by today have paid $325. And we have our the lady who started City Marts, Gordon's Meats, doctors' offices. We're putting them everywhere, and we're going into all the counties. We just got to stand together, I think. If we don't, we got to try. This might.
Like all newly elected officials, Youth Legislative Governor Gary McLean held a news conference this morning. McLean told reporters about the Youth Legislature's purpose and announced what bills he supports.
I think that we can all say that this is one way that you can tactfully present your ideas with much evidence and support behind them. And like I said, education is one of the biggest things that we all strongly would like to get through to Governor James and the other state leaders.
McLean says this unusual legislative session is important because many of the bills initiated in this program have later become laws adopted by the real legislature, such as the 911 emergency number. Later this morning, Governor Fob James made an appearance, telling the youth legislature that they are the voters of tomorrow. Governor James also reminded the teens of his platform. Jane Matheson, WSFA TV News.
Fire officials say the sludge posed no harmful threat to those in the area. The truck was on its way to a waste disposal dump in Emmel, Alabama, near Livingston. The accident happened on the southern bypass when the truck driver had to stop suddenly, causing the front of the trailer to crack open and the sludge to splash on the cab of the truck, a car in front of the truck, and the highway. Police had to direct traffic for 2.5 hours while fire officials identified the chemical and workers cleaned up the mess. The sludge came from a waste treatment facility in Albany, Georgia. It is the residue left from pharmaceuticals made at the Merck & Company manufacturing plant. Officials with the company say after treatment, the sludge is harmless, containing 85% water, sand, and grit. Local fire officials say it took them 30 minutes to identify the chemical. Then the area was sanded down and the sludge put on other trucks. The entire cleanup operation took about 4 hours. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
This is a copy of the pre-sentencing report that Judge Gordon reviewed before he sentenced Tufi Deep to prison. The report is 6 pages long and charges that Deep accepted more than $800,000 in bribes and kickbacks from disaster contractors in Mobile. It charges that in one case alone, Deep accepted over $250,000 from a single Mobile contractor, Ronnie Kirkland. There's another bombshell in here too. The report charges that Tufi Deep tried to get a grand jury witness to tell him what he told a grand jury. If this is true, Deep could be sentenced to 3 years in prison just for soliciting what the law says is secret testimony. According to this report, Deep tried to get the information from the witness on September 10th of 1980. And this report says that the witness was wired for sound and that the attempt is documented on audio tape. Tufi Deep may have been found guilty in this trial and be facing a 3-year sentence for theft of property. But it is obvious that the law doesn't consider the matter of Tufi Deep and his actions in the wake of Hurricane Frederick closed. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News at the Montgomery County Courthouse.
Second game was a pitcher's duel for the first 7 innings. Alabama Christian's David Wyatt, a transfer from Auburn, mixed his pitches well and kept the Bison hitters off balance much of the time. Former Jeff Davis high standout struck out 11 for the game and running his record to a perfect 6-0. David Morris also pitched well for Southern Union. The righty gave up single runs in the 3rd and 7th innings. The Eagles finally pushed across the winner in the 9th on John Patterson's run-scoring single. Split left Alabama Christian at 12 and 13. Several players shaved their heads today, an apparent move to fire up the team. The Bisons opened their season yesterday and are now 3-1. Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports. The story begins near Tulane Court, where Willie Johnson first rounded up his team 10 years ago. Some out of school, others out of work, all on the streets. Willie Johnson has been able to show them a better way of life in the gym. This year, Johnson is coaching the Montgomery Housing Authority entry in the Southwise Adult League. There are no high schoolers on Johnson's team, and there never have been. He feels the proper place for that age individual is the classroom. Johnson demands a lot of his players. Practices are held twice a week with the emphasis on discipline. discipline, not so easy to come by in this run-and-gun league. Two former Alabama State stars, Steve Sheldon and Melvin Creighton, are a couple of old-timers on Johnson's team. Creighton was a member of last year's Hornet squad that made it to the finals of the NAIA National Tournament. It's players like Creighton and Sheldon that make Johnson's job that much easier.
The main thing is just motivate them and keep their mind to the game. They're already coachable ball players, and they are professionals. Coach's dream.
Dream became reality for Johnson's team last weekend. With AUM's Lonnie Nixon added to the lineup, the Housing Authority won the Pensacola Invitational Basketball Tournament and brought home 14 trophies. The team is undefeated in 14 games this year, and the players are a lot better off thanks to Willie Johnson. Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports.
Because there's too many killings and we want to help.
We wish, that it stopped or something would happen so we would stop. And that's why this demonstration happened today.
Because I think it's really wrong for the person or persons who ever killing the kids in Atlanta.
Well, we know that there are children being killed, but we don't know why.
Being the Church of Martin Luther King and his family is residing in Atlanta now, that we wanted to show our support for the children in Atlanta who have been murdered and the children who are still living today and has to go through the trauma of their friends or their peers being murdered.
Commissioner Matthews, after 27 months with the commission, why are you leaving?
I'm simply not happy in the job. It is a very demanding job. It's a job that requires you, if you do what the evidence is submitted shows, you have to raise rates, and people don't like that. And it follows as the ninth a day, if they don't like to have their rates raised, they don't like the people who raise them. And I just never was cut out to be the villain in the act. And I'm just not happy in the job. So I figured I'd go on.
Are there things you wanted to accomplish when you were on the commission but didn't?
Yes, it sure is. I never dreamed when I came here of the complexities of the thing. You see, we had 111, I believe it was, public hearings last year. Now, if you apply that to how many working days we had, we spend all of our time listening to people complain. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think we should have a staff, a buffer, between the three commissioners and the complainants, and let that staff hear the evidence and submit the briefs to us. It's just, it keeps us busy listening all the time.
Do you see any weaknesses in the Public Service Commission right now?
Well, I think one of the major weaknesses is in the very philosophy of the thing itself. For example, we have three co-equal authorities in the three commissions. We have, I understand, 90-something employees.
Each of those employees has 3 bosses, as it were. It just doesn't work. It's never worked, it's not working now, and it won't work in the future. You can't send a ship to sea with 3 captains. You can't build a house with 3 foremen. And neither can you run a staff with 3 people, each having equal authority, because they don't know who they work for.
There are several bills in the legislature right now on restructuring the PSC. What are your views on those bills?
I understand that some of them incorporate what I'm talking about, the central authority for the staff in one person. I'm for that. I don't think it solves a thing in the world to increase the staff membership from 3 to 5 or 7 or whatever, because the basic problems remain the same. And by increasing the numbers, you don't change the basic problem. And it's still a matter of judgment, and whether 3 men make it or 7 is moot. I don't think that increasing the commission would help one iota.
What are your future plans?
I'm actually retiring is what I'm doing, but I'm going to be associated with Mr. Charles McDonald and the Alabama Retail Merchants Association. And I'll do some lobbying work for them and what other public relations jobs they have for me, and give me something to do.
EPA officials say they've finished containing the contaminated property and have taken core samples to determine how deep the contamination goes into the ground. Right now, the EPA says the highest level of cancer-causing PCBs is still 130 parts per million. EPA scientist Chuck McPherson says the EPA recently held a town meeting where authorities answered Greenville residents' questions and assured the townspeople that the contaminated land posed no immediate hazard to them. EPA spokesman Jack Redmond says once the sampling is completed, an extensive cleanup will begin on the property, but not in the adjoining Tanyard Branch Creek, which Redmond says appears relatively free of contamination. The contamination results from a neighboring transformer repair shop dumping the chemical into a connected sewer over 5 years ago when PCB was legally used as a heat retardant in transformers. Jane Matheson, WSFA TV News.
The governor's proposal to take restrictions off the distribution of the state's tax revenues has been introduced in the Senate, and the issue could be brought up for debate in the Finance and Taxation Committee at just any time. There are a number of state agencies that feel threatened by unearmarking. One of the largest and most vocal is education, and the influence of the Alabama Education Association over the legislature isn't to be underestimated. Because such a strong lobbying group as the AEA is working against the governor's proposals, several members of the governor's staff have pumped an estimated $3,000 of their own money into an effort to help the governor out. The money has produced about 200,000 of these pamphlets. Legislative liaison Don Bryant, Senate liaison Bob Getty, and Press Secretary Chris Bentz and others are filtering out to Alabamians in hopes the constituents will see the governor's point and put pressure on their senators.
5 or 6 calls from to a senator that don't come from a lobby group, and he'll say, gosh, there's 100,000 votes swelling out there.
The pamphlets detail an argument that is the governor's, but one they say is a personal belief of their own. The pamphlets draw a dark impression of earmarking and urge the reader to call his senator. There's a pamphlet printed for each senatorial district with the senator's address and telephone number. The 3 staff members don't like to use the word lobbying to describe their support, but say they're representing what they call the silent majority.
Taxpayers are footing the bill, and they are a special interest. They pay the way, and they don't have anybody down here.
Ben says he's convinced these pamphlets have already produced results. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Because we give them an alternative. We say if you...
The Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization calls it an informational picket. The controllers' contract with the FAA expired in March, and the air traffic controllers are asking for improved conditions.
Well, we're looking for a shorter work week,
the American air traffic controllers are the only controllers other than the European controllers that are still required to work 40 hours a week. And our salary, we want a salary that's commensurate with the responsibility of the job. Everybody says that we're looking for the same salary as pilots, which isn't entirely true. We're still working 40 hours and making maybe a third of the money that pilots make. And what we're looking for is a decent salary with the shorter work week.
Favre says one problem for air traffic controllers here is that the salaries are based on the number of airplanes worked instead of the complexity of the operation. He says Danley is a small volume airport, but the controller's job here is difficult because of Maxwell's location and the placement of the runways. Another issue under negotiation is a comprehensive retirement plan that recognizes the profession's occupational hazards, such as stress-related illnesses. Favre says he doesn't know just when the negotiations will be settled.
Our contract expired on March the 15th, and right now we're in negotiation with the FAA, but our negotiations at this present time are in recess until April the 6th, and we don't have any idea of when there's going to be a settlement on the negotiations.
Why are they in recess?
The main reason that is that the FAA administrator, Mr. Helms, has not been confirmed by Congress, and the FAA negotiating team doesn't want to negotiate anything away until he's confirmed.
The next picket at Danley Field is tentatively scheduled for April 7th. Jane Matheson, WSFA TV News. It had been one of the many dreams of Tuskegee Institute President Dr. Luther H. Foster to see the historic home of the Black Institution's founder, Booker T. Washington, and the museum of peanut scientist George Washington Carver restored to the days of when they both lived. That dream finally came true today after years of planning and restoration, a project that cost more than $2.5 million. Many people were on hand to witness what National Park Service officials called a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see the dedication of the two landmarks, now part of 320 National Historic Sites.
That of the 6 new areas that were brought into the National Park System in 1974, in October, that Tuskegee is the first of those 6 institutions, those 6 areas, to enjoy other than temporary development and operational status.
And if Dr. Washington were to return home to the Oaks where he lived for 16 years, he'd find his black hat still hanging on the same rack he probably put it after a full day's work as the school's first president. Dr. Washington would also find his study and dining room much the same, as well as the carpet, though it had to be refurbished just like his sauna. Park Service officials say nearly all the furnishings are original, though some are reproductions added to show the life of Booker T. Washington, which will soon be made into a film beginning in September. Inside the Carver Museum, the peanut wizard, who invented hundreds of products from the single groundnut, would find many photographs taken with some of the first Tuskegee students. Dr. Carver would also see the original needleworks and paintings, which he crafted as gifts to several friends. Some of the experiments he did with the sweet potato remain intact, as well as the typewriter he once used. And if the peanut scientist could see his work, known worldwide, he'd probably say it was all part of God's plan. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News, Tuskegee.